Priestess with Pamela Eakins, Chapter 13, Silver Reed, Eternal Reality, The White Room, the Future. 9 returns to itself. 9 times 2 is 18. 1 and 8 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. 2 and 7 is 9. 9 sisters, 9 days. On day 9, I light the white candle, and I begin to see that every single thing at last returns to itself. I drop down in meditation, and immediately I see her. Silver Reed. She is in the round, white room, the place I saw in the beginning, a vision of absolute loveliness, filmy and translucent. She speaks, not directly to me, but like a partially disinterested tour guide to any and all who might care to pay attention. When you are visiting a place for a while, when you stay long enough to begin to get inside the reality of the natives, when you begin to see as they see and hear as they hear, as you begin to understand their social conditioning, as you begin to take in through the same kind of filter system they have, a filter system of common understanding, common perceptions, created by the communication of a shared belief in what is real and the limits and possibilities of that reality. When you begin to stand inside the native's reality and view the issues, actions, and outcome from the native's vantage point, to the extent that you want to defend the natives, you want to explain what they are doing and why, there arises this passionate desire and even the accompanying tendency to want to go native. It was not without some sadness that I finally returned home. It is interesting how one can attach to struggle. Conflict and polarization produce energy, and energy is excitement. As I lived Earth reality, walking in it as a native living in the inside, and in the back of my mind thinking all the time I was there to introduce the radiant light, I realized how seductive and even productive discordance can be. For example, I could tell you about what was called the Age of Electro Wars. This was a time in the Earth world's history when war technology and even the definition of war dramatically shifted, when the natives had created the potential for instantaneous electronic hard communication between nearly 3 billion points on the planet and many points beyond. Hard communiques were data bits sent by electronic means from a certain point to any number of designated receivers. I specify the definition of electronic hard communication because at the same time, another form of instantaneous communication had developed, which was referred to as telecommunis. Telecommunis was developed by individuals and groups of individuals who had realized the potential of instantaneous information transfer by thought. No electronic devices were required to activate what came to be known as the soft web. The hard web and the soft web were about equally reliable, as misunderstandings and communication breakdowns could happen in either area. Interestingly, however, it was not the hard web and the soft web that came into ultimate battle with each other because, in order to fight, there must exist certain shared perceptions as to what is important enough to fight about. I am not saying there was no overlap between these two groups, but the nuances comprise another story. But rather, both began their own form of internal warfare. The hard web began a battle of sweet temptation. The idea was to use the system to entreat hard webbers through enticing offers to engage in the electronic transfer of funds and resources, which would ultimately result in global shifts in wealth and power. As the game escalated, electronic viruses were introduced into the system, which could create and destroy recording systems and even whole branches of the system itself. Some of these viruses could be transferred to humans using the system, which resulted in new waves of physical and mental disorders previously unknown in the history of the Earth world. Internationally, care programs sprang up to aid the afflicted, and from every angle the ethics of the system were questioned. I do not want to give the impression, however, that the motivation for developing the system was entirely diabolical, because it certainly was not. Much of the system was developed by people with good intentions, imaginative people, the culture's youth, those whose world guaranteed them nothing and who were forced by the sheer numbers of humans combined with the shrinking resources on the planet to create for themselves methods both to guarantee survival and to enhance the circumstances of that survival. The culture's youth perceived infinite potential in the worldwide market. Some of them believed with all their hearts that the system could be used to educate people to realize their fullest potential as citizens of the universe. That is where I was in that lifetime, a lifetime I will not describe at this moment. I was sitting at my workstation, half human, half machine, watching the screens and sending out hard communiques internationally. These communiques comprised a body of spiritual teachings I hoped would affect the philosophy and values of the people. I was fighting also what I perceived as the soft Weber's invasion of thought space. I was in the overlap group, completely open to telecommunists when I wanted to be, but objecting to the impulse some people were engaging in to try to control people without their knowledge or consent. The object there, of course, was also the control of resources. That was another form of thievery on the telecommuna highway, as far as I was concerned. For some reason, when I think of this now, it makes me laugh. I don't know, though, what is so funny about it. I remember it seemed tragic at the time. There were people gathered around my bed when I died. My nervous system had been affected by a virus in the hard web. We did not understand then the full implications of external electrical current interacting with human force fields. I suppose what makes me laugh is how hard I tried. I was young and idealistic, not only when I was on Earth as an insider, but when I first left home before I crossed the river. It took me over 6,000 years in Earth time of engagement on the Earth plane to realize that people enjoy struggle. Even I came to revel in struggle, though I would not have admitted it at any time over the course of those 6 millennia. First of all, I did not fully realize how struggle creates energy, since I had come to see with the perspective of a native. Secondly, it would not have been fashionable to admit such an addiction to creating energetic force from the inside perspective of the culture. Energy is passion. For example, the struggle for material security and gain produces extraordinary excitement in the human, but the struggle eventually ends by creating imprisonment within the very wealth that is acquired. Eventually, such wealth is allowed to dissipate, or it is formally cast aside, no longer seeming meaningful, to be replaced by an equally engaging struggle of spirit. The spiritual struggle begins with an individual revelation that sheds light on life's true meaning. The revelation creates a founding principle for the development of spiritual community. The community develops structure, which takes on a life of its own. It is believed by insiders that the structure exists to ensure the good of all. The structure is a springboard for spiritual studies, but it also becomes a control mechanism that curtails individual freedom. Ultimately, the individual, feeling confined, rebels against the structure. Seeking the path of spiritual freedom, the individual turns attention to a deep struggle of the heart. The heart opens to feel, and with that opening comes the stirring of all emotion. The heart opens to experience all sensitivities, and the individual is moved into awareness. All of life becomes filled with poignancy. The rose, whose petals are torn away by crashing waves in the roaring sea, entreats the poet to weep. All of life becomes grit for the pearl. The individual moves into the deep, dark chasm of the self and discovers empty spaces, spaces that seem to lead through a hole in the soul into some great universal abyss. It is then that the individual realizes the only way out is to rethink the situation, to come out of the depths, and the struggle of heart is abandoned in favor of a struggle of the mind. An idea comes, a light turns on, dries the tears, and illuminates the darkness. The light increases in intensity as the idea takes form and is nurtured. The individual is rescued from the emotional abyss of the heart by thinking things through, by thoughtfully and consciously reflecting and coming to terms with ways to correct whatever is amiss. Chaos becomes orderly. Layer upon layer of thought is painstakingly developed to create a network over the abyss, which the individual uses like a ladder to move into new possibilities on the material plane. At last, the intellectual struggle can be abandoned to be replaced by a struggle to recreate material conditions to reflect the new exalted thought pattern. A new material struggle begins. The material struggle moves through its cycles, eventually giving way to a new spiritual struggle, and the whole cycle begins again. There are lessons at each moment in the turning, of course, and all of these lessons are entirely important. Through engaging in the spiritual struggle, the entity begins to understand the meaning of freedom. The emotional struggle creates a deep sense of compassion. The mental struggle ultimately evolves a state of wisdom. The material struggle evokes a sense of possibility. The perception, the meaning of each of these qualities, of course, remains entirely subjective. So then, looking back, I have to laugh at my own intensity. If you can see the humor in it, it can be really funny. In that Weberian lifetime, my name was Copper, by the way, before I became afflicted by that blasted pathoteletournitis, PTT, and I could no longer input data physically or mentally. I was sitting at my workstation, lost in the deep, dark entrails of that labyrinthine network, sending out on both the hard and soft webs the ultimate realization at which I had arrived. The ultimate lesson of Earth School, I implored to anyone who would tap in, is about understanding the meanings of freedom, compassion, wisdom, and possibility. When we understand this, I pleaded, we can actualize our full potential as free agents who, in perfect alignment with the most evolved love and truth, create perfect possibility in an idyllic universe. Can you see the irony of that scenario? I thought I had missioned to Earth to affect the philosophy and values on the planet. I thought I had chosen to emanate with that mission freely and clearly. But what I did not realize when I left home to go to Earth was that I was not on the planet to teach, but to learn. In fact, everyone on the earth plane is sent there to learn his or her subjective lessons, the ones that will affect the ultimate course of eternal universal ways. It bears repeating that the experience is entirely subjective, and each participant is in the exact part of the cycle that is required for his or her own specific education at an absolute and particular, highly determined moment in time. The earth world is a small and intricate classroom elaborately equipped and designed for an infinite number of experiments. Having exquisitely enjoyed all the cycles many times over, though I did not often think I enjoyed it at the time, I left, finished, but with my heart broken open, celebrating the exquisite poetry of earthly forces and forms. I left as acculturated as any one of you might have become who emerged on the planet and throughout each heart cycle found yourself going more and more native. There is something to be said for being willing to engage in the struggle. When my heart broke, and it happened when I fell in love, I realized I had one. Before closing, I will communicate just a bit about who and where I am and where I am going. Silver Reed is not my name, of course, but rather a code name. The reed is a hollow transmitter. Silver is a euphemism for the ultimate power of conduction. Reavect, which in my lifetimes as Pamela and also as copper, as my memory was awakening, I misunderstood and misspelled as Reavec, to the detriment of the understanding of the Weberians, a story I choose not to go into at this time, is the stream of connection that electrifies and illuminates universal transmission. You will remember that in going to the earth world, I crossed the river of forgetfulness so that I would be able to experience the earth world from the inside. My full memory of my origins and my destiny did not return until I had long since left behind the twisted body of copper, collapsed and turned inward with that dread neurological PTT. I did not realize until then, as you must have already guessed, that Reavec and I were two aspects of the same being. I am, as I was, and as I ever shall be, the essence of creative principle. Pamela almost understood the nature of this essence, which, as you must know by now, was her own essence, and also yours, when she one day realized that Reavec was the Metatron and asked him if she could change his name to Metatron in her book, Priestess. At the very suggestion, he doubled over laughing. He thought it was hysterical and said she could call him anything she wished. Her reasoning at the time was her sudden revelation that the one she called Riavek was the beginning, the end, between, with, before and after, there and back again, eternal stability and change, the boundary and the threshold, thus meta, and the instrument or tool of all of this as well, thus Tron. Riavek appeared like an angel in her earthly, conditioned thought patterns, and one day it came to her in a flash of insight that she had been dealing with the angel Metatron all along, the one who was pure Illuminati, the one who had delivered the mystical Kabbalah to the people, the one from whom all knowledge emitted, the one to whom all knowledge returned. When I embodied Pamela, I saw through the veil, but dimly. The thing that she, had trouble conceptualizing was that I am everywhere and nowhere, and from her standpoint, in a very specific latter 20th century earth-based context filled with energized polarities, this was difficult for her to comprehend. Since she had completely and passionately been native for over 5,000 years in body, mind, heart, and spirit. She did one time in March of 1993 formulate the question, though: how could I be everywhere and nowhere when I am sitting right here in California scribbling in my journal? I am sure you know what I mean. By now, you understand that I am the transmitter, the receiver, and that which is transmitted and received. In short, the creative principle, your own individual essence. I can tell you that you are free, you are loving, you are wise, and you are infinite. But I know that whatever you learn, you will learn in your own way, in your own time. One small afterthought. There is a tiny little bud on the end of a branch on the tree in the middle of the garden. Be still and know the most exquisite blossom that ever was stands ready to open and flower. Open your eyes to see. She blooms with time. She blooms with love. Life is sacred, and just as life guards you, you are life's blessed guardian.